The smoke rose thin and gray against the morning sky, and Bethany Rowland didn't look up when she heard the horse approach the creek behind her late husband's property outside Jordan Valley, Oregon. She fed another letter into the small fire she'd built between the rocks, watching the careful script curl and blacken, the words Thomas had written to her during their brief courtship disappearing into ash. It was April of 1882, and she'd been a widow for 3 months, but only now could she bring herself to let go of these remnants of a marriage that had been more duty than devotion. The cowboy dismounted quietly, his boots crunching on the spring grass that grew thick near the water. Franklin Dawson had ridden out from the cattle station 20 miles west, carrying a message for the Rowland ranch about a boundary dispute, but the sight of the lone woman by the creek made him forget his errand entirely. He recognized her from town, the young widow everyone whispered about, the one who'd married Thomas Rowland when she was barely 19 and he was 43. Now she sat with her black mourning dress spread around her like a pool of ink, her auburn hair catching the light as she methodically destroyed her past. Franklin knew he should announce himself, ride on, leave her to her private grief. Instead, he tied his horse to a cottonwood and walked closer, his shadow falling across the water. Bethany finally looked up, her green eyes dry but tired, so deeply tired that Franklin felt something crack open in his chest. "I'm not trespassing," she said flatly. "This is still Rowland land, and I'm still a Rowland. Wasn't going to say you were." Franklin settled himself on a large rock a respectful distance away, removing his hat and setting it on his knee. He was 26, sun-bronzed and rangy, with dark hair that needed cutting and eyes the color of creek water. "Just seemed like you might want company, or maybe you want to be alone. I can ride on if that's the case." Bethany studied him for a long moment, then fed another letter to the flames. "Stay or go, makes no difference to me." So Franklin stayed. He watched as she pulled letter after letter from the wooden box beside her, each one a promise Thomas Rowland had made and broken. The older man had courted her properly enough, writing weekly when he'd traveled to Portland on business, painting pictures of a comfortable life on a prosperous ranch. What he hadn't mentioned was his temper, his drinking, or the gambling debts that had slowly consumed everything he owned. When pneumonia took him in January, Bethany had discovered the ranch was mortgaged beyond saving, the cattle sold off one by one to pay for his poker losses in the saloons of Silver City. "He wrote beautiful lies," Bethany said suddenly, her voice carrying across the creek. "Every word in these letters is a beautiful lie. He said he wanted a partner, he wanted a servant. He said he'd build me a library. He couldn't even keep the barn roof from leaking. He said he loved me." She stopped, her hand trembling as she held the last letter above the fire. Maybe he did, in his way, but it wasn't enough to stop him from destroying everything. Franklin waited, understanding that she wasn't really talking to him but to the ghost of the man who'd failed her. When she finally dropped the last letter into the flames, she let out a breath that sounded like it had been trapped in her lungs for years. "I was 17 when he started courting me," Bethany continued, still staring at the fire. "My father had died, my mother was sick, and we had nothing. Thomas offered security. My mother pushed me toward him, said I was lucky an established man wanted me. I thought I was doing the right thing, the practical thing." She laughed, but there was no humor in it. "By the time I realized what I'd agreed to, I was standing in front of a preacher." "How old are you now?" Franklin asked quietly. 22. Ancient, according to the women in town who think I should already be remarried and producing heirs for some other man's legacy. 22 isn't ancient, it's barely started." Bethany finally turned to look at him fully, really seeing him for the first time. He had an honest face, she thought, open and earnest in a way that Thomas's had never been. There was kindness in the set of his mouth, and his hands, work roughened and strong, rested easy on his knees. He looked like a man who knew how to wait, who understood that some things couldn't be rushed. "Why are you here?" she asked. "Not by the creek. I mean in Jordan Valley. You're not from here." "Wyoming, originally. Came west looking for work after my parents died. Found a place at the Morrison Cattle Station. It's honest work, and the land here suits me." He picked up a smooth stone and turned it over in his palm. "I was supposed to ride out here with a message about grazing rights, but I expect that can wait until tomorrow." "The ranch isn't mine anymore," Bethany said, her voice hardening. "The bank takes possession next week, so whatever boundary dispute needs settling, they can settle it with the banker. Where will you go?" It was the question that had kept Bethany awake for weeks, staring at the ceiling of the house that was no longer hers, listening to the empty silence where a marriage should have been. "I have an aunt in Portland. She wrote offering me a place, but that feels like giving up, running away. My mother is buried here. My father, too, over in the Jordan Valley Cemetery. Everything I've ever known is in this valley. Then stay. And do what? I have no property, no money, no prospects. The respectable families won't hire me as a governess because I'm too young and too recently widowed. The saloons would hire me, but that's not a path I'll take." Franklin was quiet for a moment, watching the fire burn down to embers. The last of the letters had been consumed, leaving only gray ash that the creek breeze caught and scattered across the water. "The Morrison place needs someone to manage the house," he said carefully. "Mrs. Morrison passed last year, and her husband is getting on in years. He's been trying to run the household and the ranch both, and it's too much. He mentioned last week he needs to hire someone competent who can keep accounts and manage supplies and oversee the cooking and cleaning. It's not charity," he added quickly, seeing her expression. "It's real work, and it pays fair wages, room and board included. You barely know me." "Why would you suggest this?" "Because you're burning your past and you need a future, and because I've seen enough of life to know when someone deserves a second chance." Franklin met her eyes steadily. "Also because I watched you in town once, about 6 months back, when Thomas was drunk and making a scene outside the Mercantile. You got him to his horse and home again without once losing your dignity, even though everyone was staring. That takes strength. Mrs. Morrison was strong like that. The ranch could use someone with that kind of backbone." Bethany felt something unfamiliar stir in her chest, something that might have been hope if she dared to name it. "I don't need rescue," she said, but her voice lacked conviction. "Good. I'm not offering rescue. I'm offering information about a job." Franklin stood, settling his hat back on his head. "Morrison Ranch is 20 miles west, just past the fork in the Awahi River. You decide you want to inquire about the position, ride out there and ask for Samuel Morrison. Tell him Franklin Dawson sent you. He'll give you a fair hearing. And what do you get out of this?" Franklin smiled, and it transformed his whole face, making him look younger and impossibly earnest. "Maybe the pleasure of knowing I helped someone who needed helping. Maybe the chance to see you again without it being over a pile of burning letters." He walked back to his horse, swinging into the saddle with easy grace. "Choice is yours, Mrs. Rowland, but for what it's worth, I think you're the kind of person who lands on her feet." He rode off before she could respond, leaving Bethany alone with the dead fire and the creek's constant murmur. She sat there until the sun climbed high enough to burn off the morning chill, staring at the ash-stained rocks and thinking about choices, about second chances, about the difference between rescue and opportunity. 3 days later, she rode a borrowed mare west toward the Morrison Ranch, everything she owned packed into 2 saddlebags. The valley opened up before her, rolling grassland punctuated by sage and juniper, the Awahi River cutting through the landscape like a silver thread. The Morrison Ranch, when she finally reached it, was larger than she'd expected. A sprawling operation with a sturdy main house, multiple outbuildings, and cattle dotting the distant hills. It spoke of prosperity earned through hard work, not squandered through weakness. Samuel Morrison was 70 if he was a day, white-haired and weathered, with sharp blue eyes that assessed Bethany with uncomfortable accuracy. She stated her business plainly, not mentioning Franklin's name until Morrison asked who'd sent her. "Dawson spoke of you," Morrison said, gesturing for her to sit on the porch. "Said you might come around, said you were worth listening to. Franklin's not usually wrong about people." "I'm a widow with debts and no property," Bethany said bluntly. "But I can read, write, and cipher better than most. I managed my late husband's household for 3 years, such as it was. I know cattle and horses, I can shoot straight if needed, and I'm not afraid of hard work. What I don't know, I can learn." Morrison studied her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "My Judith ran this house for 48 years before the cancer took her. Since then, it's been chaos. I need someone who can manage supplies, oversee the staff, keep the books for the household accounts, and generally make sure this place runs smooth. It's not easy work. You'd be managing 3 ranch hands who live in the bunkhouse, a cook who's temperamental as a spring storm, and dealing with my occasional stubbornness. Pay is $30 a month plus room and board. You'd have your own room in the main house, take your meals with the hands unless we're entertaining business associates, and have Sundays mostly to yourself. You interested?" $30 a month was more than generous for a woman's wages in 1882. Bethany understood immediately that Morrison was paying her what the job was worth, not what a widow's desperation might force her to accept. "When would I start?" "Today, if you're willing. I've got a cattle buyer coming in 2 days, and the house looks like a twister hit it." Bethany extended her hand, and Morrison shook it with a firm grip that sealed the deal. She moved into a comfortable room on the 2nd floor, with a real bed, a window overlooking the river valley, and a door that locked from the inside. That last detail mattered more than she'd expected. For the first time in 3 years, she could close a door and know she was safe behind it. The work was demanding but satisfying. Bethany threw herself into organizing the household, cataloging supplies, establishing schedules, and coaxing the temperamental cook into cooperation through a combination of respect and practical help. She discovered that she had a talent for management, for seeing what needed doing and making it happen efficiently. Morrison watched her work with approval, occasionally offering gruff praise that Bethany learned to value highly. Franklin came by the ranch often, riding in from his duties at the cattle station or stopping by on his way to town. He never made excuses for his visits, just showed up and found reasons to linger. Sometimes he helped mend fence while talking to Bethany as she checked on the kitchen garden. Sometimes he sat on the porch after dinner, drinking coffee and telling stories about Wyoming, about growing up on a small homestead with parents who'd loved each other fierce and true. "My mother died first," he told her one evening in May, the sunset painting the sky orange and purple. "Fever took her quick, and my father just seemed to fold in on himself. He lasted another 6 months, but his heart wasn't in it anymore. I buried him next to her and sold the homestead to the neighbor. Couldn't stay there with all those ghosts. You regret leaving?" Bethany asked, pouring more coffee from the pot she'd brought outside. "Some days. But staying would have meant living in the past, and I'm too young for that. My parents wouldn't have wanted me to stop living because they did." He looked at her over the rim of his cup. "You understand that, I think, That's why you burned those letters. I burned them because I was angry, because Thomas took years from me that I'll never get back. You're 22. You have a lot of years ahead. Do I? Bethany set down her cup, her voice sharp. You know what people say about me in town, that I married for money and got what I deserved when there wasn't any, that I'm probably a fortune hunter looking for my next victim. Mrs. Henderson actually crossed the street to avoid speaking to me last week. Franklin's jaw tightened. Mrs. Henderson is a bitter old crow who married for money herself and succeeded, so she resents that you failed. You know what I see when I look at you? What? Someone who survived. Someone who made the best of a bad situation and came out the other side with her integrity intact. Someone who's rebuilding her life from scratch and doing a damn fine job of it. He leaned forward, his elbows on his knees. You want to know what I think about when I ride over here? I think about how I'm going to make you smile, really smile, not that polite expression you use when Morrison's entertaining business associates. I think about what story I can tell that'll make you laugh. I think about whether you might, eventually, want to see me as something more than the cowboy who happened to sit with you while you burned your past. Bethany's heart hammered against her ribs. Franklin, I've been a widow for 4 months. I was married for 3 years. I don't even know who I am without being someone's daughter or someone's wife. Then take your time figuring it out. I'm not going anywhere. He stood, collected his hat, and headed to his horse, leaving Bethany on the porch with her racing thoughts and the realization that she wanted him to stay, wanted to call him back, wanted things she'd thought were dead and buried with Thomas Rowland. Summer rolled across the valley in waves of heat and golden grass. Bethany managed the Morrison household with increasing confidence, earning the respect of the ranch hands and even the grudging approval of the cook. Morrison himself seemed years younger, freed from the burden of managing both ranch and household. He took to eating dinner with Bethany on the porch most evenings, sharing stories of the early days in Jordan Valley, when the valley was wild and the future uncertain. You remind me of my Judith, he said one night in late June. Not in looks, but in spirit. She had that same steel in her spine, that refusal to be broken by circumstance. When we first came here in '49, this was Paiute land and the conflicts were bad. Judith learned to shoot, learned to negotiate, learned to do whatever it took to build something lasting. You've got that in you. That determination to build, not just survive. I'm trying to figure out what I want to build, Bethany admitted. The ranch runs smooth now. I could do this work forever and be content, but I don't know if contentment is enough. Morrison chuckled. You're thinking about young Dawson. Is it that obvious? Only to someone who's paying attention. He's a good man, Bethany. Honest, hardworking, steady. The kind of man who'll partner with you, not own you. If you're worried about what people will say about you courting so soon after Thomas passed, stop worrying. Anyone with eyes could see that marriage was a business arrangement that went bad. You don't owe Thomas Rowland's memory anything more than you've already given. I'm afraid, Bethany said quietly. What if I'm wrong again? What if I'm seeing what I want to see, not what's really there? Then you'll handle it, same as you handled everything else. But I don't think you're wrong about Dawson. I've known him 2 years now, and he's never been anything but exactly what he appears to be. That's rare in this world. Franklin asked her to dinner in town the following Saturday, and Bethany surprised herself by saying yes. She wore her best dress, a deep blue cotton that she'd made herself, and let her hair down from its usual practical knot. When Franklin arrived to collect her in Morrison's buggy, borrowed for the occasion, his face lit up in a way that made Bethany's stomach flip. You look beautiful, he said simply, and she believed him. They ate at the hotel restaurant, ignoring the stares and whispers from other diners. Franklin talked about his plans, about the money he was saving, about his dream of eventually having his own small ranch. Bethany talked about books she'd read, about wanting to travel someday, about ideas she had for improving the efficiency of ranch management. They argued good-naturedly about politics, discovered they both loved thunderstorms, and found themselves laughing over shared opinions about various Jordan Valley busybodies. Walking back to the buggy, Franklin took her hand. It was a small gesture, but it sent electricity up Bethany's arm. His palm was calloused and warm, and his fingers intertwined with hers like they'd been made to fit together. "Can I court you properly?" Franklin asked when they reached the Morrison Ranch, the moon high and bright overhead. "I know it's soon, and I know people will talk, but I don't want to waste time pretending I don't feel what I feel. I'm in love with you, Bethany. I've been in love with you since I saw you burning those letters, choosing to let go of the past even though it hurt. I want to build a future with you if you'll have me." Bethany looked up at him, this good man who'd sat with her by the creek without judgment, who'd offered help without conditions, who'd waited patiently while she found her footing. "I'm not who I was when I married Thomas. I won't be managed or controlled or treated like property. I won't give up my work or my independence easily. I need partnership, real partnership, or nothing at all." "I wouldn't want anything less than that," Franklin said. "I watched my parents build a life together, equal partners in every way that mattered. That's the only kind of marriage I'm interested in." "Then yes, court me properly. Let's see if what we feel now can grow into something lasting." Franklin kissed her then, soft and careful, a question and a promise all at once. Bethany kissed him back, tasting possibility and hope and the future she was choosing for herself this time. The courtship lasted through the summer and into fall. Franklin rode over every Sunday, his one day off, and they spent long afternoons exploring the valley on horseback, swimming in the river when the heat grew intense, talking about everything and nothing. He met her sharp intelligence with his own, challenged her opinions respectfully, and listened when she talked about her dreams of someday opening a school for girls, teaching them practical skills beyond needlework and decoration. Morrison watched their romance bloom with approval, telling Franklin outright that he'd never find better than Bethany Rowland. The ranch hands teased Franklin mercilessly but kindly, recognizing that their frequent visitor was well and truly smitten. In September, Franklin took Bethany to meet his boss at the cattle station, a meeting that felt significant. The station manager, impressed by Bethany's knowledge of ranch operations, offered her opinion on several management questions, then told Franklin privately that he'd be a fool to let this woman slip away. "I don't intend to," Franklin replied. He proposed in October, on the anniversary of the day they'd met by the creek. He took her back to that spot, where the cottonwoods had turned gold and the water ran clear and cold. There was no fire this time, no burning letters, just the two of them and the future they wanted to build together. "I don't have much," Franklin said, kneeling on the creek bank. "But I have $600 saved, a steady job, and a heart that's completely yours. Marry me, Bethany. Let me spend the rest of my life proving that not all men are Thomas Rowland, that love can be partnership and passion and everything you deserve." Bethany pulled him to his feet, laughing and crying at once. "Yes, God, yes. But we're doing this different from last time. I want time to plan, time to be sure, time to do this right. Take all the time you need. I'm not going anywhere." They set the wedding for March of 1883, giving themselves 5 months to prepare and save. Morrison offered them a section of his land, 200 acres on the western edge of his property, as a wedding gift. It was generous beyond measure, the kind of gift that would give them a genuine start. "I'm 72 years old," Morrison told them when they protested. "I've got no children, no heirs except some cousins back east who have never even written. You two have made this ranch feel like a home again. This is my way of making sure that continues, that this valley has young people who'll care for the land the way Judith and I did." Franklin and Bethany spent their engagement building toward their future. Franklin worked extra hours, taking on any additional duties that paid. Bethany continued managing the Morrison household, while also studying everything she could about running a ranch, reading Morrison's collection of agricultural journals, and picking his brain about water management, breeding stock, and market timing. They talked endlessly about their plans. They'd start small, with a dozen cattle and some chickens, building up slowly and sustainably. Bethany would continue working for Morrison part-time while also managing their own place, at least until they were profitable. Franklin would keep his position at the cattle station for another year or two, providing steady income while their ranch established itself. "We'll build something that lasts," Franklin said one evening in December, the two of them sitting by Morrison's fireplace while a snowstorm raged outside. "Something based on what we both want, both need, equal partners in everything." "I want children eventually," Bethany said, watching the flames. "But not right away. I want time for just us first, time to build our foundation." "That sounds perfect to me." The wedding took place on a bright March morning, with the whole valley invited. Bethany wore a cream-colored dress she'd sewn herself, with lace at the collar that had belonged to Franklin's mother. Franklin wore a new suit, his dark hair finally trimmed, looking impossibly handsome and impossibly happy. Morrison gave Bethany away, walking her down the aisle of the small Jordan Valley church with pride evident in his weathered face. The ceremony was simple and heartfelt, with vows that Bethany and Franklin had written themselves, promising partnership and respect and love that would grow deeper with time. At the reception in Morrison's barn, decorated with wildflowers and lanterns, the whole community celebrated. Even Mrs. Henderson came, offering stiff congratulations that Bethany accepted graciously. The ranch hands played fiddle and guitar, and Franklin danced with his bride until her feet ached and her face hurt from smiling. "Happy?" Franklin asked, pulling her close for a slower song. "Happier than I ever thought I'd be," Bethany admitted. "When I was burning those letters, I thought I was burning any chance at love, at real marriage. I thought I'd used up my opportunity and failed." "You were making room," Franklin said, "making room for something real." They moved into the small cabin on their land, a simple two-room structure that they'd built together over the winter months. It wasn't much compared to Morrison's sprawling house, but it was theirs, built with their own hands and their own vision of the future. The first year of marriage was hard work and deep satisfaction. They rose before dawn, worked until dusk, and fell into bed exhausted but content. Franklin proved to be exactly what he'd promised, a true partner who valued Bethany's opinions and shared both the labor and the decision-making. When Bethany suggested they invest in better breeding stock, Franklin listened and agreed. When Franklin wanted to build a larger barn before adding to the house, Bethany saw the wisdom and supported him. They argued sometimes, both having strong opinions and the stubbornness to back them up, but they learned to fight fair, to listen, to compromise. Unlike Bethany's first marriage, where disagreement had meant Thomas's temper and her silent submission, this marriage had room for both their voices. Morrison's health declined slowly over the next 2 years, but he remained sharp and engaged, spending long afternoons on their porch, advising on ranch management and telling stories of the old days. He lived to see their operation become profitable, to see Franklin leave the cattle station to work their land full-time, to see Bethany's confidence bloom into full authority. "You've done well," he told them in the summer of 1885, his voice thin but satisfied. "Better than I hoped. You'll take care of the old place when I'm gone." "We will," Bethany promised, holding his hand. "We'll honor what you and Judith built." Morrison died peacefully in August, leaving his entire ranch to Bethany and Franklin, along with detailed instructions for its management, and a letter expressing his pride in them both. The inheritance made them, overnight, one of the most prosperous operations in the valley. It was overwhelming and humbling, and a responsibility they took seriously. "He trusted us with his legacy," Franklin said, standing in Morrison's house, now theirs. "Everything he and Judith spent a lifetime building." "Then we'll be worthy of that trust," Bethany replied. "We'll build on what they started, make it even better." They combined the operations, managing both properties with the help of additional hired hands. Bethany's talent for organization and management flourished on the larger scale, while Franklin's understanding of cattle and land stewardship proved invaluable. Together, they made decisions that improved profitability while also treating their workers fairly, paying decent wages and maintaining safe conditions. In the spring of 1886, Bethany discovered she was pregnant. She was 26 now, and Franklin was 30, and they'd been married 3 years. The timing felt right, their foundation solid enough to support a family. "A boy or girl?" Franklin asked, his hand on her still flat stomach, wonder in his voice. "Healthy. That's all I care about." Their son was born in December, a robust baby with Franklin's dark hair and Bethany's green eyes. They named him Samuel, after Morrison, and called him Sam from the start. Fatherhood transformed Franklin, bringing out a tenderness that made Bethany fall even more deeply in love with her husband. He would walk the floor at night with Sam, singing off key lullabies, changing diapers without complaint, and staring at his son with undisguised awe. "I never knew I could love anything this much," Franklin confessed one night, Sam asleep on his chest. "You and Sam, you're my whole world." "Good thing we're not going anywhere," Bethany said, leaning against her husband's shoulder, watching their son sleep. They had 2 more children over the next 5 years, a daughter named Julia in 1888 and another son, Thomas, in 1890. Naming their youngest son Thomas had been Bethany's idea, a way of making peace with her past, reclaiming the name for something good. Franklin had understood, supporting her without question. The ranch prospered under their joint management, becoming known throughout eastern Oregon for quality cattle and fair dealing. Bethany's dream of starting a school took shape slowly, beginning with lessons for the ranch workers' children in their home, then expanding into a proper schoolhouse they built on their property in 1892. She taught reading, writing, arithmetic, and practical skills, ensuring that every child, boy or girl, had the tools to build whatever future they chose. Franklin served on the town council, working to bring better roads and services to Jordan Valley. Together, they became pillars of the community, respected for their integrity and their commitment to making the valley a better place for everyone. On a spring morning in 1893, Bethany found herself alone at the creek, the place where her life had changed 11 years earlier. Sam was 7 now, Julia 5, Thomas 3, all safe at home with their father. She'd ridden out alone, needing a moment of solitude to appreciate how far she'd traveled. There were no letters to burn now, no past to destroy. Instead, she had a present that felt rich and full, a future that stretched bright and promising. She had a husband who was truly her partner, children she adored, work that mattered, and a community she'd helped build. She had respect, security, and most importantly, love that had grown deeper and stronger with every passing year. Franklin found her there, of course. He always seemed to know when she needed him, riding up on the same horse he'd ridden that first day, though both of them were 11 years older now. "The kids?" Bethany asked as he dismounted. "Playing in the barn under Mrs. Cooper's watchful eye. I thought you might want company." He sat beside her on the creek bank, their shoulders touching. "You were thinking about that first day, weren't you? How did you know?" "Because I was thinking about it too. About how close I came to riding past, minding my own business. What would have happened if I had?" "You'd have delivered your message about the boundary dispute and ridden away," Bethany said. "And I'd have gone to Portland, lived with my aunt, and probably become a bitter woman who never trusted anyone again. Instead, I burned my past and built a future. We built a future." She turned to look at him, this man who'd sat with her through the hardest moment and stayed for all the beautiful ones that followed. His face was weathered now, lines at the corners of his eyes from squinting into the sun, but he was still the same honest, steady man who'd offered help without conditions 11 years ago. "I love you more now than the day I married you. I didn't think that was possible, but it keeps growing." Franklin kissed her temple, his arm around her shoulders. "That's how it's supposed to work. Every year, every challenge, every joy, it adds another layer. My parents had that. I'm grateful we have it too." They sat together as the morning sun climbed higher, warming the rocks and the water, chasing away the last remnants of the spring chill. 3 children waited at home. A ranch needed managing, a school needed teaching, and a life needed living. But for this moment, they were just 2 people by a creek, grateful for the chance encounter that had led to everything else. "Should we head back?" Franklin asked eventually. "In a minute." Bethany leaned into her husband's warmth, listening to the creek's constant murmur, the same sound that had accompanied her lowest moment and now witnessed her highest joy. "I just want to remember this, all of it." "We have time," Franklin said. "We have all the time in the world," and they did. They had decades ahead of them, years of watching their children grow and thrive, of building their ranch into something even greater, of growing old together with grace and humor, and the kind of love that deepened with every passing season. They had arguments and reconciliations, hardships and triumphs, the full rich texture of a life genuinely shared. Sam would eventually take over the ranch, proving as capable as his parents. Julia would become a teacher like her mother, opening schools across eastern Oregon. Thomas would move to Portland, becoming a lawyer who fought for workers' rights and fair treatment. All 3 children would grow up knowing what real partnership looked like, carrying that model into their own relationships. But that was all in the future, spread out like a gift waiting to be unwrapped. For now, in the spring of 1893, Bethany and Franklin simply sat together by the creek where their story had begun. 2 people who'd found each other at exactly the right moment, when one needed sitting with, and the other needed someone to sit beside. The ashes from those long-ago letters had washed away years ago, carried downstream and scattered, making room for something infinitely better. Bethany had burned her past and discovered her future, had let go of beautiful lies and found beautiful truth. She'd learned that love wasn't about rescue or being saved, but about 2 people choosing each other every single day, building something together that neither could build alone. "Ready now?" Franklin asked as the sun climbed toward noon. "Ready," Bethany agreed. They rode home together, side by side as they'd been for 11 years, and would be for all the years to come. The creek flowed on behind them, constant and unchanging, a witness to endings and beginnings, to the moment when Franklin Dawson had sat with Bethany Rowland, until the ashes fell and changed both their lives forever. In the distance, Their ranch spread across the valley, buildings and fences and carefully managed land, the physical manifestation of their partnership and their love. Smoke rose from the chimney where Mrs. Cooper was making lunch, and if Bethany squinted, she could just make out 3 small figures playing in the yard, their children, the future they'd created together. This was what happiness looked like, Bethany thought. Not the desperate grab at security that had defined her first marriage, but this slow, steady building of a life that honored both people in it. This was what love looked like when it was real, when it was rooted in respect and partnership, and the daily choice to show up for each other no matter what came. Franklin reached over and took her hand as they rode, their fingers intertwining with the ease of long practice. Bethany squeezed back, a silent conversation that needed no words. They understood each other, these two, in ways that went deeper than language. They'd built that understanding through 11 years of shared work and shared life, through conflicts resolved and joys celebrated, through the simple daily act of choosing each other over and over again. The ranch house grew larger as they approached, solid and welcoming, filled with the noise and chaos of family life. Sam saw them coming and ran out to meet them, Julia close behind, both children shouting questions and stories about their morning adventures. Thomas toddled after his siblings, determined not to be left behind despite his short legs. Franklin dismounted and scooped up Thomas, tossing him in the air and catching him securely, making the boy shriek with delighted laughter. Bethany slid from her own saddle, accepting Sam's enthusiastic hug and listening to Julia's breathless account of the kittens in the barn. This was life, messy and loud and utterly perfect. This was what she'd been moving toward that day by the creek, though she hadn't known it then. She'd been ending one chapter, preparing herself for whatever came next, and Franklin had appeared like an answer to a prayer she hadn't known how to pray. Mrs. Cooper called them in for lunch, and they trooped inside, a family unit complete and secure. The meal was simple but satisfying, eaten amid laughter and conversation, the easy flow of people comfortable with each other. Afterward, Franklin returned to mending the east pasture fence while Bethany taught the afternoon session at the school, their lives interwoven but not consuming each other, each person maintaining their own identity within the marriage. This balance, Bethany had learned, was crucial. She wasn't Franklin's wife first and herself second. She was Bethany Dawson, ranch manager and teacher and mother and partner, all those roles equally important and equally honored. Franklin supported her ambitions as fiercely as she supported his, neither one demanding that the other shrink to make room. Evening found them on the porch again, their favorite time of day. The children were in bed, the ranch work complete until morning, and they had these quiet hours to reconnect and simply be together. Franklin's arm was around Bethany's shoulders, her head resting against his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. "What are you thinking?" Franklin asked, his voice a rumble under her ear. "That I'm grateful. For all of this, for you, for the choice I made to stay in the valley instead of running to Portland, for the job at Morrison's ranch that brought us together properly, for every single day we've had since. I'm grateful too. Grateful I decided to stop that day by the creek instead of riding past. Grateful you let me sit with you. Grateful for every moment since then." They were quiet for a while, watching the stars emerge in the darkening sky. The valley stretched around them, vast and beautiful, the land they'd chosen, and that had chosen them in return. This was home, not just the house and the ranch, but this feeling of rightness, of being exactly where they were meant to be with exactly the right person. "Do you ever wonder what Thomas would think?" Franklin asked carefully. It was a question he'd never asked before, respecting that Bethany's first marriage was a closed chapter. If he could see you now, Bethany considered it honestly. I think he'd be surprised. He never really knew me, never wanted to know the real me. He wanted a pretty young wife who'd do what she was told and make him look good. He couldn't have imagined me running a ranch, teaching school, making decisions that affected dozens of people. But you know what? It doesn't matter what he'd think. That chapter is closed. I burned those letters and I meant it. You were so sad that day, Franklin said softly. So tired and sad and determined. I wanted to fix it, to make it better, but I knew I couldn't. All I could do was sit with you. That was exactly what I needed. Not someone trying to fix me or save me or tell me what to do next. Just someone willing to sit with me in the hard moment, to witness it without judgment. That's when I started falling in love with you, I think. I just didn't recognize it yet. When did you recognize it? Bethany smiled against his chest. That first dinner in town, when you talked about your dreams and asked about mine, when you treated my opinions like they mattered just as much as yours. That's when I knew this could be something real. They talked late into the night, the way they often did, about the ranch and the children, about dreams for the future and memories of the past. These conversations were the foundation of their marriage, this constant communication and sharing, this refusal to let distance grow between them through silence or assumption. Eventually, they went inside, checking on the children before retiring to their own room. The physical side of their marriage was another place where they'd built something beautiful, based on mutual desire and respect, on knowing and being known. It was nothing like Bethany's first marriage, where intimacy had been something she'd endured rather than enjoyed. With Franklin, it was partnership here too, both of them focused on the other's pleasure, both of them fully present and engaged. Afterward, lying tangled together in the darkness, Bethany felt profoundly grateful for this second chance at love, at life, at building something meaningful. She'd thought she was finished at 22, burned out and used up, but she'd been wrong. She'd just been getting started. The years continued to unfold, each one bringing its own challenges and joys. Droughts tested their ranch management skills. Economic depressions required careful navigation and tough decisions. The children grew and changed, bringing both pride and worry. But through it all, Bethany and Franklin faced everything together, their partnership growing stronger with each test overcome. They celebrated their 20th anniversary in 1903, surrounded by family and friends, their children nearly grown, their ranch thriving, their love deeper than ever. Standing before the gathered crowd, Franklin raised his glass in a toast. 20 years ago, I married the strongest, smartest, most capable woman I've ever known. She's made me better in every way that matters. She's built something remarkable here, not just a ranch or a school, but a vision of how people should treat each other, with respect and fairness and genuine care. I'm grateful for every single day I've gotten to spend as her partner. Bethany stood to offer her own toast, her voice steady and sure. I came to this valley as a desperate girl in a bad marriage, thinking my life was essentially over at 22. Instead, I found a man who saw me as a person first, who offered help without conditions, who sat with me through the hard moment and stayed for all the beautiful ones after. Franklin gave me the space to become who I was meant to be, and I'm grateful beyond words for the life we've built together. To 20 more years, and 20 after that. They clinked glasses amid cheers and applause, two people who'd beaten the odds, who'd built something lasting in a hard land during a hard time. Their love story wasn't dramatic or flashy, but it was real and deep and utterly worth celebrating. Sam got married in 1905 to a neighboring rancher's daughter, a young woman as capable and strong-minded as his mother. The wedding was held on the ranch, with half the valley in attendance, and Bethany watched her son promise to love and respect his bride the way his father had taught him, with genuine partnership and unwavering support. Julia followed in 1907, marrying a fellow teacher she'd met at an education conference in Portland. The ceremony was smaller but no less heartfelt, two educators committed to making the world better through learning and opportunity. Thomas married last, in 1910, bringing home a sharp-tongued lawyer from Portland who made everyone laugh and think in equal measure. Bethany liked her immediately, recognizing a kindred spirit who refused to be limited by others' expectations. All three marriages were partnerships, equals choosing each other, and Bethany knew that she and Franklin had given their children that template through their own example. It was perhaps their greatest legacy, teaching their children what real love looked like, what genuine respect and partnership meant in practice. The years marched on, bringing gray hair and reading glasses, grandchildren and great-grandchildren, the slow accumulation of a life well lived. Bethany and Franklin remained active in ranch management well into their 60s, only gradually handing over more responsibility to Sam and his wife. The school continued to thrive, with Julia taking over the teaching duties while Bethany supervised and advised. In 1918, on a spring morning much like the one 36 years earlier, Bethany returned to the creek. She was 58 now, her body stiffer than it had been, her face lined with decades of sun and laughter and the hard work of building a life. Franklin was 62, still strong but slower, his dark hair completely silver now. They'd developed a tradition of returning to this spot every year on the anniversary of the day they'd met, sitting by the water and remembering how it had all begun. Today, the creek flowed as it always had, constant and unchanging, witnessing their story year after year. 36 years, Franklin said, settling beside her on their favorite rock. Since I rode up and saw you burning those letters. Best decision I ever made, Bethany said. Burning them and letting you stay. Best decision I ever made was stopping. I almost didn't, you know. I thought about just riding past, not interfering. But you didn't. But I didn't. Something told me to stop, to sit, to just be present. I'm grateful I listened. They sat in comfortable silence, hands intertwined, watching the water flow past. This creek had witnessed their beginning, had flowed past countless anniversaries and celebrations, had been the steady backdrop to their love story. It would continue flowing long after they were gone, Bethany thought, but they'd left their mark on this valley, on this land, on the people they'd raised and taught and influenced. No regrets, Franklin asked, the question he asked every year. Not a single one, Bethany replied, the answer she gave every year. You. Only that I didn't get more years with you. However many we get won't be enough. It was true. They were approaching their 60s, knowing that their time was finite, that the years ahead were fewer than the years behind. But they'd lived those years fully, holding nothing back, building something beautiful and lasting and utterly their own. They returned to the ranch as the sun climbed higher, riding side by side as they'd done for decades, comfortable in each other's presence and grateful for another year together. The ranch spread before them, now managed primarily by Sam, but still bearing the stamp of their vision and values. The school stood on the hill, educating its third generation of students. Grandchildren ran through the yard, carrying on the legacy of love and partnership that Bethany and Franklin had established. This was the happy ending Bethany had never expected, the one she'd thought was impossible when she sat by the creek burning her dead husband's letters. She'd thought she was ending something that day, closing the door on love and marriage and the possibility of happiness. Instead, she'd been making room for something infinitely better, something built on respect and equality, and the kind of love that grew deeper with every passing year. Franklin had sat with her until the ashes fell, and then he'd stayed for the building that came after, for the daily work of creating a life together, for all the joy and sorrow and ordinary magic that made up a marriage genuinely worth having. They'd built an empire together, not just of land and cattle, but of love and family, and the kind of legacy that couldn't be measured in acres or dollars. As they dismounted in the yard, surrounded by the noise and chaos of family life, by grandchildren shouting for attention and ranch hands waving questions, and all the beautiful messiness of a life well lived, Bethany caught Franklin's eye and smiled. He smiled back, that same open, honest expression that had first captured her heart 36 years ago by a creek in Jordan Valley, Oregon. They'd found each other at exactly the right moment, when one needed sitting with, and the other needed someone to sit beside. From that single act of kindness and presence had grown everything else. All the years and all the love and all the beautiful life they'd built together. The ashes of those long-ago letters had washed away, making room for something permanent and precious and utterly worth every moment of the journey. This was their happy ending, but it wasn't really an ending at all. It was just another day in a life filled with love, another morning in a marriage that had exceeded every expectation, another moment in a love story that had started with ashes and grown into something golden and lasting and completely their own.